Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to NowThis live fact check of President Trump's briefings. My name is Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer. I'm supported today by our whole newsroom of producers who are all working under self-isolation from their respective homes. Most of us are in New York City, the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. While we are waiting for the president, we'd like to answer some of your questions, so please type them in the comments. The U.S. passed a grim milestone today. There are now over 1 million confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the U.S. And by the end of the day, this disease is likely to have killed more Americans than the Vietnam War, which the U.S. was involved in for over a decade. Now, again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, the senior politics producer for NowThis. If you care to follow me on Twitter, that is apiper13. We are bringing you the president's briefing from the East Room. I'm not in the East Room. I'm in the East Village. I'm in my apartment. We would normally be doing something like this from our studio, but we do not have access to our current studio operations, so we are each broadcasting from home. So if a cat jumps on my keyboard and gets in front of the camera, apologies in advance. So the president appears to be attempting to reboot his daily press conferences after being widely mocked for Thursday's statements that people might consider injecting themselves with household disinfectants. The president took 2 days off from his briefings. He did not take days off from tweeting. He launched a steady stream of pretty intense attacks on Twitter over the weekend. He spent most of what was the First Lady Melania's 50th birthday sending angry tweets about Democrats, specifically Hillary Clinton, and the Russia investigation. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, she is reportedly just about to endorse Joe Biden. Joe Biden is doing a 3 p.m. Online town hall where the endorsement is expected to occur. I honestly think it's coincidence that President Trump moved his briefing, which has every day been seemingly timed to coincide with the nightly news. Today he has moved it up to 3 p.m., which will coincide with Hillary Clinton's endorsement of Joe Biden. But I honestly think this is a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that he has been preempting the nightly news, but I do think that today's timing is a coincidence. The East Room setting also attempts to change the tone, but it doesn't change the facts. And again, we're expecting the president at any moment. I'd like to try to use this time to answer some of your questions, so please type them in the comments. But while we're waiting for your questions and for the president, I want to again run through some of the timeline of events, because the president has consistently tried to rewrite the timeline of late. So as we have focused on a lot, I get through the first part of the timeline, I don't always get to the end. First part of the timeline, President Barack Obama in 2014 established a global health security unit within the National Security Council, and his team, which included Joe Biden, put together a 69-page pandemic response playbook. The idea was that they wanted to make sure that any future administration wouldn't be starting from scratch, would actually have a playbook that they could go by for rapid response in the event of a public health crisis. 2017, during the transition, Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, personally emphasized to Trump's national security team that she believed that the risk of a health crisis was one of the biggest threats that the nation could be facing. So remember that when President Trump says, as he often does, that no one could have seen this coming. So Doreen asks a question, how many deaths as of today? According to Johns Hopkins, who seems to have the best numbers, the global deaths are over 215,000, and in the U.S. it is over 56,000. We have been adding Over 1,000 deaths every day in the U.S. It seems likely that we will cross the threshold of the 58,220 that would make this deadlier for U.S. lives than the Vietnam War. So thank you, Doreen, for your question. And everyone else out there, please type your questions in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. So, first year of President Trump's term. We have reporting that shows that the Pentagon flagged that there was a potential shortage of masks, hospital beds, ventilators, and other equipment. The Trump administration did not act upon that then. The camera is zooming around in the East Room. I see, okay. So we've been told that what we're going to be focusing on today is the Paycheck Protection Plan. Often the president does not actually focus on what he says he will, but it is interesting to note that there is a sign for Orsten Bank, so that might be an indication that the focus will in fact be on what it is said to be. So anyway, going through the timeline, 2017, the Pentagon warned the Trump administration that there was a potential shortage of medical supplies should there be a public health emergency. President Trump did not act on that. In 2018, he went a step further and he fired that global health security unit that President Obama had put together in the National Security Council. He also opted not to renew the CDC's epidemic prevention funding, causing it to downsize in 39 countries, including China. President Trump lately is trying to blame China for not sounding alarm bells sooner. The CDC could have helped sound alarm bells sooner had it not had to close down its offices in China. According to ABC's reporting, the first warnings from the intelligence community that there was a dangerous virus emerging in China came in November. Remember that when President Trump says he took swift action, because he did not take any actions until February. The first alerts came in November 2019. December 31st, Reuters reports that the White House National Security Council was again briefed. January 8th was when the CDC issued its first warning. The very next day, President Trump held a rally. January 9th, the World Health Organization, remember President Trump has frequently been pointing fingers at the World Health Organization saying that they weren't sounding an alarm early enough. They sounded an alarm on January 9th, long before President Trump took an interest in the subject. That night, President Trump held a rally. January 10th, the World Health Organization issued a comprehensive package of technical guidance with advice to all countries for how to detect, test, and manage potential cases. January 14th, President Trump held a rally. January 18th, the Washington Post reports that Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar tried to have an urgent call with the president about the crisis. President Trump reportedly cut him off to berate him about his handling of an attempt to ban flavored vaping products. Then President Trump hung up the phone and went golfing. January 19th, he went golfing. January 20th, that is a key day. January 20th was the first day that the United States confirmed a case of the coronavirus. It was also the first day that South Korea confirmed a case of coronavirus. Now, the difference between how these two countries handled this could not be more stark, and it is notable that to date, South Korea has had only 244 deaths total from this disease, whereas the U.S. has had over 56,000. Now, you would expect, given the difference of size between the two countries, you would expect the death toll to be about 6 times higher in the U.S. You would not expect the death toll to be about 230 times higher in the U.S. That indicates a startling difference in the way the two countries responded to this threat. South Korea immediately put into place a nationwide system of testing. President Trump was yesterday laying out the beginnings of a plan for nationwide testing. Not in January, not in February, not in March, but at the end of April. January 22nd, President Trump was asked whether he was worried. He said, no, not at all. He said, quote, we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be just fine. January 23rd. Now, President Trump has lately been suggesting that China did not take decisive action. China shut down the entire city of Wuhan on January 23rd. This could have been seen as an alarm bell to President Trump. That day, the World Health Organization held an international news conference and again sounded an alarm. That day, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. President Trump did not declare one. January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning that the Trump administration was not taking the crisis seriously enough. January 28th, then candidate for president Elizabeth Warren released her coronavirus plan, and that night President Trump held a rally. January 29th, President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, sent an urgent memo warning that a full-blown pandemic could imperil the lives of millions of Americans. Only then did President Trump form a task force to address the issue. Remember, intelligence officials had been sounding an alarm since November of 2019. Now, the State Department at that time was working to bring home 6,000 Americans from Wuhan. The United States did not have 6,000 tests. While other countries were putting in strict travel restrictions on China, barring anyone from coming in, President Trump and his State Department were actively trying to bring Americans in who had been in China. January 30th, China locked down all of Hubei province, and that was the day that the World Health Organization labeled this a global health emergency. And President Trump swiftly responded by holding a rally. In late January, we now know that Secretary Azar requested $136 million to fight the virus, and the White House refused. Now, I'm going to interrupt this timeline a little bit to answer a couple more of your questions. We are waiting for the President of the United States to emerge at any moment, and I see people are standing up. This could indicate that he has entered. Or it could indicate that he's about to enter. There we go. I think the President is entering. There is applause. So the President and First Daughter / White House Senior Advisor, Ivanka Trump, we will attempt to fact check them in real time.
You have social distance on your mind, and that's a very good thing, Jovita. Congratulations. Tremendous job you're doing. I want to thank everyone for being at the White House, a very special house, a very special place, no matter where you go in the world. I love the White House, and being here in the East Room of the White House in particular, where so many important functions have taken place over the years. And today we're really celebrating American workers and small businesses, and we've done a job for you, and we're going to make it so as we open up our country, you're going to be in good shape as opposed to be either losing your business or how do we get some people to work here, especially.
President Trump was just talking about what a spectacular and historic place the White House is. It is indeed. It is America's house. He has reportedly referred to it as a dump. He has denied making those remarks, but the journalist who recorded them stands by them.
An SBA administrator, you've been busy, Steve, by the way? A little bit, right? Broke every record in the book. An SBA administrator, Jovita Carranza. Thank you, Jovita. Have you gone to sleep in the last 2 weeks? I don't think so, right? You broke every single lending record, numbers of loans, amount of loans, small business, sexually.
All right, we're going to check and see if there's truth to the fact that every single record of loans was broken. I'll tell you what was broken, the Small Business Administration website. It crashed. both in the initial round of loans and in the first hours of the new rounds.
Been anything like this? We suffer with one heart, but we will prevail. We're coming back, and we're coming back strong. We built the greatest economy anywhere in the world 2 months ago, and we're going to build it again. We're going to build it fast. It's going to go.
Okay, well, President Trump repeatedly says that the economy was the greatest in the world prior to this. It wasn't. It had been stronger by many metrics many times, and he has frequently suggested that it will quickly rebound. Virtually no economists agree with that analysis.
Millions of hardworking Americans have been asked to really make tremendous sacrifices. It's sacrifices like nobody thought would even be possible. Nobody thought would ever be talking about something like this. This virus has inflicted an enormous and painful toll on our nation's workers and small businesses. That's why last month I asked Congress to pass the Paycheck Protection Program, giving small businesses emergency economic relief to keep workers on the payroll. 4 weeks ago, I was proud to sign it into law. We did that at a great ceremony with many of the people here and the officials here, and it was something. And I can tell you, I'm going to ask Steve to say a few words, but the kind of numbers and the kind of jobs they've done and the kind of jobs that have also been saved, it's incredible. You'll be seeing that in the coming weeks. The Treasury Department.
So there have been a lot of problems with the rollout of the Paycheck Protection Plan, and I imagine we'll get into a lot of them today. But since the president is talking about the importance of companies not laying employees off, I want to highlight that his own companies have laid off at least 1,500 people.
Work and more loans, both in terms of applications and in terms of dollar amount, than they did in 14 years. 14 days, 14 years. Easy one to remember, right? That's some record. The first round of funding provided more than 1.6 million small businesses with over $340 billion so that American workers can retain their jobs, receive their paychecks, and help our economy take off quickly once America reopens for business, which is happening right now as we sit. We're going to be all set. You all ready? I know you are. I talked to you back there. You're ready. You folks are ready. Our swift action supported or saved 30 million American jobs at least. And last week, Congress answered our call to replenish the program, and I was honored to sign an additional $320 billion for American workers into law. At least $60 billion are reserved for community financial institutions, including those that serve minority and distressed communities.
Okay, so that is true, but his claim of credit for it is not accurate. $60 billion are specifically reserved for minority-owned businesses. This is something that Democrats fought for, Republicans fought against, and Democrats got. And now President Trump seems to be claiming credit for it despite having opposed it.
System as on any day under the first round. And one of the things that the Secretary of the Treasury told me is that the amounts are much more loans at much smaller amounts. And we like to hear that because we're looking at the small amounts, the smaller businesses, and that's what we want. Nonetheless, we're processing loans at a pace never achieved before. In the first 24 hours of the second round of funding, we've handled over 30% more loans than any previous day of the program. So far, we've processed an amazing 450,000 loans totaling over $50 billion. That's in phase two. That's incredible. Along with Administrator Carranza and Secretary Mnuchin, Ivanka has played an essential role in spearheading this important program. Incredible role. That's what she wants to do. She wants to help people. From the beginning of my administration, Ivanka has used her experience as an entrepreneur to fight for the American worker. She's created many jobs. That's what she did when she first came in. She just wanted people to be able to get jobs and job training.
It is unclear that Ivanka has created any jobs since getting one, working in the White House. In November, President Trump falsely credited her with creating 14 million jobs that year, which was just not true.
Is now on almost 15 million people. And I'd like to ask, if I might, Ivanka, to say a few words as to what's exactly happening today, what's happening over the next week, and what her views are for what's going to happen over the next period of time. It's going to be something I think is going to be very special and bigger and better than anybody really understands. Let's see if I'm right about that. Ivanka, please.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. President, for convening this incredible group of entrepreneurs and small business owners who very much represent the soul and the spirit, the grit and the tenacity of America's small business owners across the nation. So we're grateful to each and every one of you for joining us here today, and very excited to hear your stories and hear specifically about how you're going through this challenge and how through the Payment Protection Program and through the PPP, you are able to keep your workforce employed. It's about your businesses thriving and growing within your communities. It's about your workforce, who each of you cares very dearly about. And I'd like to make a special call out of thanks to Secretary Mnuchin for his tireless work on this front. So if you'd like to come up and join us, we would appreciate that, Secretary. And SBA Administrator Carranza, thank you. You have been such a champion for America's small business. If you'd also like to come up and join us.
So just a little bit more on that stat about Ivanka. So in November, President Trump said that through her work in the White House, she had created 14 million jobs since she'd been in the White House. The entire U.S. economy had only added 6.2 million jobs at that point. So somehow she was being credited with creating more than twice the jobs of the entire economy as a whole. It was a false claim.
The PPP program was able to rehire the 120 workers that she was forced to lay off. And now those workers, all of which have some form of disability, are able to bring cheer and bring comfort to your clients as you're serving them. So Amy, if you'd like to come up and share your story. And Michael, her great colleague, is here today as well, who could share his perspective. Thank you, Amy.
And just, I also want to highlight, Ivanka was just thanking economic advisor Larry Kudlow and saying what a great job he'd done. In February, he said about the coronavirus and its economic fallouts, quote, "We have contained this." I won't say airtight, but it's pretty close to airtight. Those words don't hold up very well in April.
Rights movement. We employ 120 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and for most of them, it's their first paying job, which made the decision for us to temporarily close all 5 of our shops especially difficult. But thanks to the Paycheck Protection Program and the incredible team at Live Oak Bank, all 120 of our employees are back on the payroll today and working from home, writing handwritten notes that we include with each online order we ship. I know everyone is ready to return to normal, but I believe it's time for a new normal, one where people with disabilities are valued, especially in the workplace. As a recipient of the PPP loan, we will continue to take up the charge and help everyone, especially people with disabilities, pursue the American dream. And Michael, would you like to say?
Sure. Just hope this thing isn't too big for me. So to you, President Trump and Ivanka, thanks a lot for inviting us. Thank you, Mr. President, for having us. I love my job, and I am excited about going back to work. At Bowes, we like to use the phrase called "not broken." That means me and all my amazing coworkers are not broken, and we have lots to offer. I know the great country of the United States isn't broken either. So on behalf of myself, Megan, and Amy, and all the employees of Bowes, thank you for inviting us over. You guys are our family.
better than we did. Much better, Michael. You did a better job. Thank you very much. That's beautiful. Stick around. You get to hear the press ask some questions, and they'll probably be a little bit nicer if you're in the audience, right, Amy? That's pretty good. Also, I'd like to ask Tony Stafford, Chief, sort of the boss, I guess you could say, chef and founder. You're the boss, right? Wouldn't you say? Of Ford's Fish Shack. And I hear it's good stuff. How about explaining, please? Best? Oh, I'll have it. Be careful. Thank you. Come on up, please.
Now, I do want to highlight, since the Trump administration seems to be celebrating its role here in helping people with disabilities, that the president proposed budget cuts in February that would slash funds to state councils on developmental disabilities, university centers on developmental disabilities, and protection and advocacy programs. And also, of course, President Trump very famously mocked a reporter with a disability, Serge Gobolewski, when he was building Trump Tower. Against the law, he ordered the braille to be removed from the elevators because he said there would be no blind people working in Trump Tower. He offended many people with disabilities by saying that the Paralympics are, quote, hard to watch, and nearly 20% of people in America have a disability. And the Trump administration also, under Betsy DeVos, was trying to slash the Special Olympics budget. And of course, has been proposing more than $1 trillion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. So it is quite striking to see this administration try to claim some mantle of disability advocacy.
Surviving out there, we're doing things that we didn't do before with carryout and curbside and delivery and all those meal plans. Those things are awesome to see my fellow industry leaders out there doing in the restaurant industry. So I commend every one of those restaurants that's fighting to survive out there. And so thank you all for that. We will get through this. We will welcome our guests back, and once our state opens up, we'll welcome them back and thank them for their support through all this. I have amazing stories of guests coming into our restaurant the day after the closures to just give us tips, give us cash to give to our employees we had to furlough. So those great stories, that will not be forgotten from any of our guests. So thank you for that. And I look forward to the one day when all restaurants and all small businesses can reopen and be as successful as they were before. So thank you very much. Mark? Thank you. Thank you.
So my name is Mark Underwood. I am an employee of Ford's Fish Shack, so I am a living example of what your plan has done. I'm a husband, father of 5. My mother lives with me. And just listening to Tony talk about that day when the layoffs happened, it's a little emotional. But with the PPP, it has now given life to my family. It has injected hope in our business, and it's allowing us to fight the fight. So I appreciate it from everybody on your team to help us get through this issue that we're going through. So thank you very much.
Help you.
Thank you.
Is he a great chef or a good chef?
He's a great chef. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. That's a great story. Your mother lives with you, 5 children. That's a great story. So that was a rough day, right? Wasn't it? Huh? Never happened to you before, probably. Yeah. Happened to a lot of people. It never happened before. So, but we're bringing it all back. There have been a couple of places that have opened, and I don't know if you saw this, Tony. They have some restaurants, and they have lines that are very long to get in. People want to be back. They want to come back. We're going to bring a country back. They want to get to work.
Okay, so long lines anywhere would be a bad thing at this point, not a good thing, since we are attempting to social distance. Also, the president says that the majority of Americans are eager to get back to work. Yes, they are. However, recent polls show that a greater concern among the majority of Americans is that it is not yet safe to do so. The majority of Americans support continued stay-at-home orders until we can be more sure that it is safe for people to return to normal.
Honored to be here. My name is Jackie Craig. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia in South America. Yay. And I've been here many years, and a big part of those years that I've been here, I've been CEO of ECU Communications, which I founded 16 years ago. We focus on advertising and marketing with niche products.
Now, this is also interesting that President Trump has invited an immigrant to speak about how she has benefited. He has just signed an executive order to severely limit legal immigration, even though immigrants start businesses and become job creators at twice the rate of people born in the U.S. This entrepreneur who's speaking here is one more example of that.
At the end of February, I hired 3 more staff members. We're 30 now. So when we heard the news about going home and working from home or not being able to work from home, you know, the first thing that goes to your mind is how am I going to support or tell these folks that they need to go. Being able to get the PPP loan has given me the ability to have that peace of mind that I'll keep them, their treasured staff, and I'll be able to continue to focus on my program. Thank you so much for what you do, for your leadership. Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Great job. Chris Stansbury, co-founder and partner, West Virginia Eye Consultants. I like West Virginia, you know. I like it. I'll put that up.
They like you, sir.
I like it. They like me, too.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ivanka, Mr. Secretary, Madam Administrator. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's just an honor and a privilege as a small business owner. It's very meaningful to have this opportunity. My company is called West Virginia Eye Consultants, based out of Charleston, West Virginia. And we started in 2011, and we had 2 doctors, 1 employee, and 1 location. And over the last 9 years, we've been blessed with a lot of growth. We've worked hard. And in February, we celebrated our 9th anniversary with 7 locations, 7 doctors, and almost 60 employees. So it's been a great ride. But just a month later, thanks to COVID-19, we shut most of it down. And my partners and I were just overwhelmed, just bewildered. We weren't sure how we were going to survive this. But thankfully, Congress passed the CARES Act, and President Trump signed that into law. And as part of that, the PPP loans became available. And my partners and I applied for PPP loan through the SBA, and we were so gracious and so thankful to receive that, because it's been a lifeline for us. As soon as we received those funds, we were able to start paying our utilities, our rent, and start bringing some of those employees back that we need to get staged to begin to reopen the economy. And so we're just so grateful for President Trump's leadership and Congress for working with him to get us through this crisis. So thank you so much, sir. We appreciate all your help. Thank you.
So you do eye examinations, doctor? And you do glasses and all that? I may have to see you. Okay? I guarantee you're probably better than these high-priced people. I used to see the highest priced, and they were not the best. I'll bet you're better than all of them. So I may have to see you, doctor. I'm serious about it.
President Trump might need to. As a reminder, he looked directly into an eclipse without protective glasses, which is not advised.
Thank you. Tissa Clark, President and CEO, J.D. Clark Professional Services. J.D. Clark. Hi. Come on up. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President, Ivanka, Mr. Secretary, and Madam Administrator. I am Tissa Clark, President and CEO of J.D. Clark Professional Services. I am a general contractor and property maintenance manager for the affordable housing, hospitality, as well as our government agencies, particularly our nonprofits. Most of my employees are the underserved, underemployed, or unemployed. And having the opportunity to be able to apply for a program such as the Paycheck Protection Program allowed me to keep those individuals employed. As a small business owner, my company is based out of Prince George's County, Maryland, and I've been in business for 12 years. And as a small business owner, we never want to fire or lay off. and even to the extent of ourselves not receiving a paycheck. And so I forgoed my paycheck until I could get funds. And so now with the funding that we received via M&T Bank on last Monday, it has allowed us to continue to pay our staff and for even myself as the business owner to once again take a paycheck. So this program is phenomenal for our small businesses. Also, as a side note, Madam Administrator, I did also apply for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and I did receive my advance on Tuesday of last week. So these programs are very critical for the small business community. But
that economic injury disaster loan was also something that Democrats fought to add into the bill.
Have you ever thought about running for office? You could do it very easily. Huh? You are something. That's a very good job. Thank you very much. Luke Bernstein, Executive Vice President, Chief Retail Officer, and Chief Communications Officer for Orrstown Bank. Come on up, Luke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ivanka, Secretary Mnuchin, Administrator Carranza. I'm Luke Bernstein, proud to be here representing Orrstown Bank. I'm proud of our board, I'm proud of our entire team, and I'm proud of my fellow community bankers throughout the country who've rolled up their sleeves and worked tirelessly to help communities working around the clock and helping them gain access to Paycheck Protection Funds. Orrstown is a small 101-year-old community bank based in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and in just 14 days, we were able to process approximately 1,500 Paycheck Protection loans totaling $370 million. In those 2 weeks, Orrstown processed more loans in total amount than we did in an average year last year. We did more SBA loans in 14 days than in our entire 101-year history. Why? Because this is about the communities. This is not about Orrstown Bank. This is not about banks. This is about people. The stories you're hearing today. This is about what's going on Main Street. The stories of what's happening with the Paycheck Protection Program are not only heartwarming, they're inspirational. We're helping pizza shops, delis, healthcare workers, repair shops, construction companies, and countless others get access to these funds. These people need this money. They're getting a lifeline through this program. Every job is life-sustaining to someone, and the PPP is saving the livelihoods of those in our communities. We want to thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership during this extraordinary and unprecedented time.
Now, President Trump seems to be trying to take credit for the PPP as if it is his program. It was a bipartisan plan that Democrats and Republicans came together to create. President Trump signed it. President Trump is implementing it. There have been problems with the implementation, but it is not a plan that is his plan to take either full credit or full blame for.
Thank you very much, Luke. That's a beautiful job.
And I'll get into some more details about specifically some of the problems with the implementation of the Paycheck Protection Program a little bit later on.
Please come up.
Thank you, Mr. President, Ivanka, Secretary. And instead of celebrating on our anniversary on April 1st of being in business, we began furloughing employees. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank President Trump for quickly signing the PPP into action. Because of this program, Ed and Jim's is able to rehire all of our furloughed employees and provide them with a paycheck starting this week. This program has given our small business the funds needed to operate and maintain through this crisis. With everything we've gone through, I can't extend our thank you enough to President Trump for everything he's done for small businesses like us in the automotive industry at a time where our business really depends on people leaving their house and driving. So, Mr. President, thank you very much for what you've done, for what you've done for us in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. And what do you do with cars? Explain.
Our businesses, we repair cars. We're a collision repair shop, Parkville, Maryland. So we work with a lot of insurance companies. We have walk-in customers. So if you get into an accident, unfortunately, we're here to help you out.
Can you generally fix, like when there's a problem with a car, can you generally fix it without sending for new pieces? Or do you generally have to put new pieces on if it's a big collision?
And we are aware the president is not standing close to the microphone, so we're not hearing a lot of what he's saying right there.
But with the demand for manufacturers to move to producing other things such as PPE and things like that, we're a little nervous about what that means for the future for us right now. But we know you'll do the right thing for us.
After today, you'll have a lot of customers.
We appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. Allie Mills, Executive Vice President, Plum Contracting, Inc. Would you like to have, come on up here. He was so good. Put that mask on the way you had it.
Thank you, President Trump.
The president said something about masks. I'm not quite sure what he said, but I do want to highlight that no one here is wearing a mask, even though that is the CDC's guidance. And while they are making a general effort to stay about 6 feet away from each other, they are not entirely successful at that. And I want you to keep an eye on how people keep touching the mic and touching the podium after each other. The president has done a poor job of modeling the behavior that he has and his public health experts have been urging people to engage in.
Of our employees, about 125, which included trades and management. There were a lot of sleepless nights and fear of losing it all. The Payroll Protection Program was and remains the engine that is carrying our business through this shutdown. We wouldn't survive without it. With our PPP approval, by May 1st, we anticipate our company running at full capacity when the highway industry is permitted to return back to work. Mr. President, for your interest in the welfare of America's small business and the American worker. And thanks to all that, my company will be here to work on a big infrastructure program very soon when you're ready to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I do want to highlight again that in the first round of funding, even though this program was intended for small businesses, a lot of the money was gobbled up by big corporations. Supposedly, they are going to be returning a lot of that money, but it remains to be seen.
And he did very opposite of what a lot of governors did. He said, this is a great time to fix our roads and highways. And I said, as soon as he said it, this was in the Oval Office 2 hours ago, he said, I noticed there was very few cars, and isn't that better than fixing them during rush hours and when there's traffic and when it's booming, like hopefully over the next few months it's going to be again, just like it was before, the best we've ever had, and then we had to close it down. So he's fixing roads.
Okay, so the economy was not the best that we've ever had. I can get into the metrics on that later. Also, President Trump is suggesting that we should be doing infrastructure construction during this shutdown because there aren't as many people out. On the one hand, that is appealing, but that doesn't take into effect that the construction workers are also people, and that it is very hard to socially distance on a construction site. And so that would be putting the construction workers at risk. By the way, speaking of construction workers at risk, construction of the wall that seems to be being built very slowly on the southern border, does continue during this shutdown, even as the border states have stay-at-home orders in place.
Of the close to $1 trillion that the President and Congress have invested in small business to protect you and put you back to work. That's over $650 billion in the PPP. That's over $300 billion in disaster loans, and that's over $20 billion of grants. And I know the press has commented on a lot of big companies that inappropriately took the money, and we've been very clear. We announced today that any loan over $2 million will have a full review for forgiveness before they're repaid, because this is the story of small business here. And I am so pleased to see how this
at least
working.
two
So thank you.
at least two of the large businesses that seem to have inappropriately accepted the small business funds had financial connections to President Trump himself, and I'll get into that in a moment too.
Yet, please go to irs.gov, get my payment. We made some corrections to the website over the weekend. Please go on and check your payment. If you haven't received your payment, upload your information so we can get you the money. The combination of the direct payments, the PPP, the disaster loans, and enhanced unemployment insurance is the investment that the President has made in American business and American workers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Steve, very much. And on the enhanced, thank you. And Steve, on the enhanced payments, we're really looking to the state to give that out. And unfortunately, some of the states have very old computerized equipment from many generations ago. But they have the money to give out, and they'll give it out as it comes, and hopefully they'll be able to do the job. Some states have been very efficient, and others have had a hard time, but you'll work with the ones that have had a hard time. But we rely on the states, and we are relying on the states to get it out as quickly as they can, considering especially some of the equipment they have. Maybe now they'll be able to buy new equipment, right? When we get all finished, we'll have nice new computerized equipment.
So the president is making an odd claim there. He's suggesting, so a real problem that is had is that people who are unemployed are having trouble filing for unemployment because the unemployment offices are simply overwhelmed. President Trump is oddly suggesting that it is based on states failing to update their computer equipment, while it is in fact the case that many states are overdue for some new computers. The real problem is that we have 26 million Americans filing for first-time unemployment claims within the past couple of weeks. That inherently was going to overwhelm most systems, and seeming to blame it on a state failing to update its computer systems really seems to be ignoring the actual reality of the situation.
You know, as an example, China, if you test, you're going to show many more cases. So we're doing more testing than any other country in the world by far, which we just discussed over in the Oval Office. So we're going to show more cases because we're doing much, much more testing, double anybody else. Somebody said if you add everybody else combined, that would be a number, and it will be at the...
This is a false claim that the president keeps making. He keeps saying that we've done more tests than everybody else combined. It is simply not true. Now, the U.S. has ramped up testing dramatically in the past couple of weeks, which is very late in the game to ramp up testing. The U.S. has done just over 5 million tests. The rest of the countries have done more than 16 million tests. FYI, 16 is more than 5.
I'll tell you what, I did something that the experts thought I shouldn't have done. I closed down our country and our borders. I did a ban on China from coming.
Okay, this is not true. I don't want to preempt too much, so I'm going to try to circle back to some of these things, but it is not true that experts didn't want him to do it, and it is not true that it was an effective ban. We appear to have lost the signal there. I'm going to try to get it back. There we go.
Well ahead of schedule, and we did that at the end of January. People were talking about this wouldn't have an impact, as you know, even into March. So I think we've done a great job.
Okay.
That we were early. I think
we were not early in any respect. In no respect were we early. We again. South Korea had its first case the same day as the United States, and within 2 weeks had a system of nationwide testing. Germany began developing tests before it had a single case. We are in April, and we are only beginning to develop a system of testing.
Democrats, of course, up on the Hill are talking about the idea of a guaranteed income, which obviously could go on for months and months and months.
Yeah.
What about another round of
Well, I like the idea of payroll tax cuts. I've liked that from the beginning. That was the thing that I really would love to see happen.
Okay, this is a really bizarre answer. President Trump has just been asked about if there are going to be further payments for people who are out of work, and he suggests payroll tax cuts. Payroll tax cuts only benefit you if you are on someone's payroll.
That's what I like, and something like that could happen. Also, I think you have to look, because a lot of people are talking, I assume your next question would be about states. And Steve and I talk about it, and I talk about it with Mitch and with Kevin and with everybody. And the problem with the states is we're not looking to recover 25 years of bad management and to give them the money that they lost. That's unfair to other states. Now, if it's COVID related, I guess we can talk about it. But we'd want certain things also, including sanctuary city adjustments, because we have so many people in sanctuary cities, which I don't even think are popular, even by radical left folks, because what's happening is...
Okay, the president is saying a lot of false things here, and it is hard to get to all of them at once, but specifically, he is addressing the question that has been floated. Mitch McConnell has been suggesting that blue states should be allowed to go bankrupt. Blue states President is suggesting that blue states are facing budget crises because of bad management and not because of the coronavirus crisis, and this is just not an accurate claim.
It affects liability for them. What efforts or what measures are you looking at for liability for other industries and other businesses?
Well, we haven't been talked about. It hasn't been asked on other industries yet, but with the meatpacking and with the transportation, we have had some difficulty where they're having a liability that's really unfair to them, and we're going to be doing that. I think, Mark, we're going to be doing that fairly soon. It's getting drawn up. I should be signing that over the next hour or so, taking the liability, which frees up the entire system, and I fully understand it. Not their fault. Yeah, please go ahead. No, over here first.
I just want to go back to what we discussed a little earlier today. Are you considering asking airlines to test passengers on international but also domestic flights?
Yeah, we're looking at doing it on the international flights coming out of areas that are heavily infected. As you know, Brazil is getting to that category. I think they're going to be okay. I hope they're going to be okay. He's a very good friend of mine, the president. But I think that we're going to look at it from the standpoint, I was discussing that with the governor of Florida, with Ron, a little while ago. So we're going to be looking at that coming in from other countries, frankly, but South America seems to be one that's talked about because they have so much business going into Florida. With all of that being said, Florida's done incredibly well, and they're starting to open up very rapidly. But we will be looking into that in the very near future. We're looking at it very strongly.
Have this responsibility?
Either the airlines or government, one or the other. We're working with the airlines. Maybe it's a combination of both. Kristen, go ahead.
Mr. President, some health experts say the U.S. needs 5 million tests per day by June in order to safely reopen. You unveiled a plan yesterday that will increase testing, but not by that much. Why not? And can you get to that benchmark?
Well, it will increase it, and it'll increase it by much more than that in the very near future. We're way ahead of everyone on testing. We haven't.
It is simply not true that we are way ahead of everyone on testing. I highlighted some of the ways in which we fell behind other countries in testing. We reshared a video today where one of Harvard's top public health people referred to how our testing situation was a disaster. We'll circle back to this issue as well.
More than every country combined, and they keep talking.
Oh, that is absolutely not true that we've tested more than every other country combined for the very reason that I've said. We've tested about 5 million people. The other countries have tested about 16 million people. 16 remains higher than 5.
The quality of our test is the best, and the number is the best. Now, with all of that being said, we will be going to an even higher number, and it goes up exponentially. And I've told you that we inherited a very broken test, a broken system, and a broken test, and within a short period of time.
And this is a bizarre claim that the president keeps trying to make, saying that we inherited a broken test. We did not inherit. He didn't inherit a test. There was no test for COVID-19 prior to COVID-19. It only came into existence in 1919, hence the 19 in COVID-19. It took more than 3 months for the U.S. to perform a total of 5 million tests. So that is a much slower rate of testing than other countries have done.
I want to use it.
I hear you saying you're confident you can surpass 5 million tests per day? Is that?
Oh, well, we're going to be there very soon. If you look at the numbers, it could be that we're getting very close. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers. We would have had them if you asked me the same question a little while ago because people with the statistics were there.
So President Trump is now claiming that we're soon going to be doing 5 million tests a day. A reminder, it took us 3 months to conduct 5 million tests. He had promised that we would get 5 million tests done by the end of March. It took till nearly the end of April.
Given the kind of credit that it deserves. Last month it was about ventilators. Now we have so many that we're able to give them to Italy, France, Spain. Other countries have been asking us for ventilators. We're making over 150,000. We've distributed thousands and thousands. New York is in great shape with what we've done, as you know. New Jersey's in great shape. We spoke just recently. Ivanka just spoke with the governor, and they're in very good shape with the ventilators. I mean, everybody has, and most of them have far more than they'll ever need. They're starting to send them back. So nobody went without a ventilator, and yet if you read the media from a month and a half ago, it was all about ventilators. And ventilators.
It is not true to say that no one went without a ventilator, and also the president is suggesting that states have more than they need. Mayor de Blasio said today that he anticipates that before this is done, New York will need all of the ventilators that it has acquired.
In terms of the manufacture of very high-grade ventilators is a basis. So now we don't hear about that. And I noticed that the testing is starting to die down because we now have the best testing anywhere in the world by far, and we have more. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. I'm happy about it. We had a call yesterday with governors, and I will say that I'm sure many of you were on that call, even though you shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have been, Amy, but they were.
This is a weird conspiracy theory that the president has floated, that press was being unfairly and inappropriately allowed in on calls. He's either suggesting that his wires are tapped, or he is suggesting that governors are allowing reporters to listen to things that should otherwise be off limits. There is, to our knowledge, no merit to this charge.
Engineers, where we built hospitals, where we built thousands and thousands of beds all over the country. New York, what we did was incredible. 2,900 beds in a matter of days. What they've done is so incredible. And FEMA, what they've done. And the doctors and the professionals and all of the people that you see me with all the time. You know, these are great people. And they've really done a great job. And now our country's opening up again, and I think it's going to be very, very successful. I think that, I mean, Larry is here. We talked about it, and we talk about it all the time. I think that third quarter, it's obviously a transition quarter, but I think it's going to be okay, maybe better than okay. Larry thinks better than okay, I think even more so than I do. And then I think fourth quarter will be great, and I think next year is going to be a tremendous year for this country.
The president has a history of making claims about the economy that he can't make good on. I want to remind everyone that he ran with the promise that he would have 4% GDP every year that he was president. It has averaged 2.5%, which is lower than under Reagan or Clinton.
Additional people, and again, I want to assure the American public and the American taxpayers, we will make sure that these certifications were done accurately, or the loans won't be forgiven and there will be liability.
Today told some Republicans on a phone call does not want to fund infrastructure in a coronavirus stimulus bill. Do you react to that?
I think Mitch is looking at it, as I do, to an extent, as the infrastructure. He likes infrastructure. We all do. We have to rebuild our country. $8 trillion has been spent. I wasn't in favor of it. I can tell you that in the Middle East. $8 trillion. Think of it. And yet you wanted to fix a pothole in a roadway or in a highway in this country, and you didn't do it because they didn't have the money, because so much money was spent in the Middle East. Well, that's, as you know, a whole different story now. We want to do infrastructure, but a lot of people, a lot of the Republicans would like to keep that as a separate bill. So we'll see how that works out, Jennifer. We'll see. Yeah, please.
President, you said at the top of your remarks that you feel the worst of the pandemic is behind us. But without a treatment, without a vaccine, the state's now reopening. How can you be so sure?
Well, I think that, like other things, hopefully we're going to come up with a vaccine. You never know about a vaccine, but tremendous progress has been made, Johnson & Johnson.
So President Trump, it says we're making progress on a vaccine. Actually, the doctor who was in charge of leading the process was fired. He says that he was fired because he questioned the president's endorsement of hydroxychloroquine. Also, just for the record, the U.S. has spent about $6 trillion on wars in the Middle East in recent years, not $8 trillion as the president has suggested. $6 trillion is still a very large amount.
It's a bad enemy. It's a very tough enemy, but we've learned a lot. It's in 184 countries, as you hear me say often.
It's in 185 countries.
Stopped at the source, which was China. Should have been stopped very much at the source, but it wasn't. And now we have 100.
President Trump is suggesting that China should have stopped this. It is worth noting that no country has been able to stop this. President Trump specifically worked to bring 6,000 U.S. citizens home from China after they were likely exposed to the coronavirus. Some 300,000 travelers arrived in the U.S. from China before his supposed ban, which actually was not a ban at all, just a restriction on certain travelers.
Any particular stories that have affected you?
Well, I have many people. I know many stories. I've spoken to 3, maybe I guess 4 families unrelated to me. I lost a very good friend. I also lost 3 other friends, 2 of whom I didn't know as well, but they were friends and people I did business with, and probably almost everybody in the room did. And it's a bad death. It's a bad thing. It grips onto some people. Now we found out that young people do extraordinarily well. That's why I think we can start thinking about schools. But of course, we're ending the school season, so it wouldn't be probably you wouldn't be back for too long. I noticed where Purdue University, a great school in a great state, wants to open and have students come in. I think that's correct. Some colleges, I think I saw Harvard wants to have students come back in the fall. I would hope that they'd have students. I think that the whole concept of computer.
So President Trump has just suggested that young people are not impacted. In fact, hundreds of young Americans have been killed by the coronavirus. The percentage of younger deaths, which the Washington Post has defined as people under the age of 50, varies among states. But it is indeed something that is happening. And just this week, the Washington Post came out with an article that showed that some people in their 30s and 40s are at risk of stroke from coronavirus.
Such a good job. And I think we found a couple of stars in this room today. I won't tell you who, but there are a couple. This guy right here is the biggest star in the room, right? We'll all agree he's the big. I vote for you, okay? Great job you've done, and I really appreciate it, too. I appreciate you being here. Couldn't have done better.
Megan and I really like to know if you and some of your hostess, staff members, bodyguards, or anybody in your company would like to come to Annapolis to our company.
Be careful, that could happen. That could happen. Be careful. We'll have to do that, Amy. I think maybe we could do something like that. You're very good. He's stolen the show, right? Do we agree? Doc, I'll tell you, I'm getting ready with the eyes. Come on with me if you want. Do a quick one. Want to save a lot of time. We need time. We're opening up the country, Doc, so we need a little time. We can't spend too much. I don't want to spend 2.5 hours at an eye doctor, right? Okay, so we'll think about that. We want to do that. I want to thank everybody, in particular, Jovita. I want to thank you very much. And Steve, you're working. I can call Steve at any time. I can call him at 2 in the morning, 6 in the morning. It doesn't make any difference. I say, did I wake you? The answer is always no. He's doing a great job. We're proud of him. And everybody is, everybody. Our government, we have to be proud of our government, and we have to be proud of our country. These are really terrific people. We're going through a period of time, the likes of which we've never seen in this country before. Certainly, even if you go back into 1917, that was...
He's referring to the flu of 1918.
Bad here. It was very bad. It was very rough. It was a bad one, but it wasn't quite like what we're going through right now, and it's because of the amazing, when you look at how contagious this is, where people literally just being in the same area with other people, it catches. So I'm very proud of this country, I have to say. I'm very proud to be your president, and I'm very proud of this country. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, the president has finished his briefing. So Let's see what's happening here.
We're at 124 Dock Street in downtown.
124 Duck Street.
Dock Street in the downtown.
Okay, get it ready.
All right. We'll be back in
And if I don't do it, you know, they're going to be very upset with me, you know that.
Right, and they should come too if they want.
They will. They will. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
So I would like to highlight that no one in this room was wearing a mask, which is the guidance that the CDC has offered. So that was today's briefing. This was a strictly economic-focused briefing. We did not get to hear from any of the president's medical advisors. Now, there are just a couple topics that I want to circle back to. Now, the main focus of this briefing was the Paycheck Protection Program. So I want to give you a little bit more information about that because the president has suggested, and I'll get these color bars out of the way. So the president has claimed that the rollout of the Paycheck Protection Act has been more flawless than, in fact, it actually has been. There were $350 billion in the first round. The SBA website crashed immediately from a flood of loan seekers. The federal guidance on the loans didn't go out until late at night before the program was supposed to begin. So banks were basically flying blind on the first day, which contributed to their becoming overwhelmed. Many banks would not offer loans to anyone other than existing clients, sometimes particularly existing clients who had a line of credit with them. And this shut out many small businesses, and it disproportionately impacted minority-owned small businesses, which is part of why Democrats fought for a special cutout for minority-owned businesses in the second phase of the funding. Now, the program ran out of money in under 2 weeks. President Trump has called that a good thing. He said that that's because it's so popular. Popularity, that's kind of an odd way to think about it. That's like saying, oh, these ventilators are so popular among patients who are having trouble breathing. They just can't get enough of them. It's not a thing to celebrate that so many people are in need of emergency loans. It is a thing to celebrate if they're able to get them. But in fact, most people weren't. NPR reported that more than 25% of the businesses that applied were not even able to complete an application. And WNYC found that at least here in New York, 84% of small businesses in Brooklyn that were approved for loans never got the money because it ran out before they could get it. And the Associated Press reported that more than 75 major corporations took advantage of the loopholes to get loans that were intended for small businesses. And some of these big companies that got loans were owned or run by some of people who had ties to the president himself. Continental Materials, which had over $100 million in sales last year, got $5.5 million from the program. Former Trump campaign finance chair Ronald Gidwitz is the majority stakeholder. And the company that got the most money was a Dallas real estate firm that got over $53 million. The chair of that company is Monty Bennett, a Republican fundraiser and former finance chair of the pro-Trump super PAC America First Action. Now, the funding lapsed for over a week. President Trump requested additional funds for it. Democrats were on board with new funds, but they wanted certain things to go with it. They said that, yes, we'll put more money in the Paycheck Protection Program, but there is a crisis happening right now with hospitals. There is a crisis with a shortage of tests. We need to put in more money for hospitals and for testing. And Republicans initially said no. If they had to add those things, then fine, no one can have any money. And they let the program lapse for over a week. Finally, there was a compromise that no one was entirely happy with. It did not have as many of the things that Democrats said were essential, but it had more things that Republicans did not want, including $60 billion earmarked for minority-owned businesses, $75 billion for hospitals, and $25 billion for testing as part of the package. So the program has relaunched. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said there's going to be a much closer eye this time to making sure that major corporations don't game the system and get the money that is intended for small businesses. We will, as the president would say, we'll see what happens. But we do know that once again, the SBA website crashed immediately upon launch of the program because the demand was so high. Now, also on the subject of testing, the president was talking about how we are the envy of the world on testing. It simply is not the case. We are doing a much greater number of testing now than we were even a week ago. But it is April. We are 57,000 American lives into this, and we are only now getting our testing together. Here's what some people have said. This is a quote from Ashish Jha, the director of Global Health Institute at Harvard. This is an unmitigated disaster that the administration has brought upon the population. We have had a much worse response than Iran, than Italy, than China, and South Korea. And Greg Gonzalez of the Yale Global Health Justice Partnership said that this was, quote, the greatest public health failure in 100 years. Ron Klain, who led the Obama administration's efforts in combating the Ebola pandemic and is now one of Joe Biden's senior advisors, said, quote, the U.S. response will be studied for generations as a textbook example of a disastrous, failed effort. What's happened in Washington has been a fiasco of incredible proportions. A couple other things that we didn't have time to get through. Sometimes the president makes so many false statements in a single sentence that we just can't stop for all of them. I want to touch on the fact that he's predicting that there will be robust economic growth by the end of the year. Economists at Northwestern, Stanford, University of Chicago, and BU all predict that the economy will shrink by 11% by the end of the year. I also want to highlight a very dangerous thing that President Trump said today. He has parroted some language that Mitch McConnell has been using, suggesting that there should not be funds made available to blue states to recover from what is happening. Now, states around the country are all facing budget shortfalls because their workers are out of work. States make money from payroll taxes, from sales taxes, from fees that go with government services that people are not availing themselves of now. So the state of New York is looking at a $15 billion budget shortfall. President Trump is suggesting that this is the result of mismanagement, and that's really just an appalling thing to suggest. And Republicans are talking about the fact that blue states are needing money as if this is a bailout for blue states. And I want to highlight several things. First of all, it makes sense that blue states need more money because they have more people. The state of California, the state of New York, these states have a lot of people. Therefore, it takes more money to keep these states going. But what's also important to note is that these states are not asking for a handout for the federal government. These are the states that, in fact, bankroll the federal government. New York pays more into the federal budget than any other state. New York puts nearly $30 billion more into the federal budget than it ever gets back in services. The top 5 states that give the most to the federal government, they are New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and California. And the states that these are the donor states, the giver states. Republicans always want to talk about makers and takers. Blue states, I hate to say it, blue states are the maker states, and with the exception of Texas, the one red state that is able to generate more revenue for the federal government than it gets in services, the red states are the taker states. For every dollar a New Yorker has paid in federal taxes from 2015 to 2018, the state of New York only gets back 91 cents on the dollar. Now, Mitch McConnell is, he's the one talking about bailouts. For every dollar a Kentuckian pays in taxes that go to the federal government, Kentucky gets back $2.41. They are doubling their money. The blue states are bailing these red states out and have been bailing these red states out for years. Kentucky, Alabama, and Florida are three of the biggest taker states in terms of receiving funds from the federal government and not giving a lot back. And so for McConnell and Trump to be suggesting that blue states should be made to go bankrupt as a result of that there would be a bailout in some way. These states that have been, the states that in effect have been bailing out the rest of the country for years, now finally needing something back, that they should be left to go bankrupt. It really is an alarming and dangerous thing to be saying. And so yesterday, since the president finished his briefing early, I took some time to go through the timeline a little bit. And I'd like to do that again because a lot of people commented that that they were interested in this timeline. So I'm just going to spend the last few minutes of our time together walking through that timeline. We were talking about this before the president came out. The first warnings from the intelligence community that there was a threat emerging from China came out before the end of 2019. The CDC issued its first warning on January 8th. The World Health Organization issued its first warning on January 9th. The World Health Organization issued a comprehensive package of technical guidance to all countries on January 10th. During this period of time, President Trump held multiple rallies. He went golfing. Members of his administration tried to call this to his attention. On January 18th, Secretary of Health and Human Services tried to have an urgent call with the president to alert him to this crisis, and according to the Washington Post, the president used the time to instead berate Secretary Azar over his efforts to ban flavored vaping products. He then went golfing. The first case of the coronavirus was diagnosed in the U.S. on January 20th. South Korea diagnosed their first case on the exact same day. The two countries responded very differently, and we have seen a difference in their outcomes. South Korea began implementing a nationwide testing program within 2 weeks. We are months later and only are beginning to get a nationwide plan in effect. President Trump today suggested that China didn't act early enough. China shut down the entire city of Wuhan on January 23rd. President Trump, after that, worked to get back more Americans, 6,000 of them, from Wuhan, even though they had been exposed to the virus, even though there were not 6,000 tests in America at that time to see if these Americans had the virus. In January, Germany was working on developing tests. The United States was not. January 23rd, President Trump has repeatedly said that Democrats were behind in noting this crisis. On January 23rd, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was calling for a public health emergency. On January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning of this crisis. On January 28th, Elizabeth Warren released a coronavirus plan. That night, President Trump held a rally. On January 29th, Peter Navarro warned, he sent a memo saying, quote, "The lack of immune protection or an existing cure or vaccine would leave Americans defenseless in a case of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak on U.S. soil. This lack of protection elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans." Only that day, the day that President Trump's trade advisor sent an urgent memo, was a task force finally formed. January 30th, China locked down all of Hubei province, and the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency. President Trump immediately stepped into action and held a rally that night, and to my knowledge, he did not discuss the coronavirus at that rally. In late January, Secretary Azar requested $136 million for HHS to fight the virus. The White House dismissed the request. On January 1st, Trump went golfing. President Trump has suggested that he was the first to put a, quote, ban on China. He was not. Many other countries did it earlier or about the same time, and they had much more complete bans. Vietnam on February 1st put a halt on all flights from China. Not even Vietnamese citizens could return to Vietnam if they were coming from China. That day, Trump was golfing. It was not until the next day that his travel restrictions on China went into effect. At that point, 300,000 people had already entered the U.S. from China over the previous month. So President Trump's restrictions, which were not total restrictions, which still allowed some 40,000 additional authorized travelers to enter the country from China, came too late to really have an impact. And in fact, one of the senior epidemiologists at Johns Hopkins University has suggested that this travel restriction did nothing to ultimately stop the spread of the virus in the U.S. On February 3rd, the World Health Organization released a strategic preparedness and response plan to help protect states with weaker health systems. On February 5th, Secretary Azar upped his request. He asked for $4 billion to fight the virus. The Washington Post reports that this led to a shouting match within the White House. On February 6th, the World Health Organization began distributing 250,000 tests around the world. They offered them to the United States. The United States said, no, we would make our own. Around this time, the CDC produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. On February 10th, President Trump, February 10th, after this pandemic, it hadn't yet been labeled a pandemic, but this global health crisis, after the World Health Organization had labeled this a global health crisis, and after his own security advisors had warned him of the threat, President Trump on February 10th proposed a budget that would slash the CDC's budget by an additional 16%. On February 10th, twice in the day, he claimed that the coronavirus, quote, goes away in April. He said at a rally that night, by April, you know, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. We're nearing the end of April, and some 57,000 Americans have been killed by this at this point. It has not gone away. When he said that it goes away in April, there were 12 cases in this country. As of today, there are over 1 million. On February 15th, he went golfing. On February 19th, he held a rally and did not mention the coronavirus. February 20th, another rally. February 21st, another rally. Reminder, at these rallies, he's inviting large groups of people to cluster close together. He brags about the size of the crowds at his rallies. He had information provided to him at that point that should have made it clear to him that it was not a good idea to congregate large groups of people together, and yet he did it anyway. On February 23rd, Peter Navarro sent another urgent memo saying, quote, increasing probability of a full-blown COVID-19 pandemic could infect as many as 100 million Americans with a loss of life as many as 1.2 million souls. Only the next day did he finally ask Congress for additional funding. But that same day, he tweeted, quote, The coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. Stock market starting to look very good to me. On February 25th, he tweeted, "The CDC and my administration are doing a great job of handling coronavirus." On February 25th, he said that it's, quote, "going to go away. They have studied it. They know very much. In fact, we're very close to a vaccine." The best estimates put a vaccine at least a year away now. In February, he was claiming we were close to one. February 26th, he said, "You treat this like the flu. The risk to the American people remains very low. The 15 cases in the U.S., within a couple days, it's going to be down close to zero." Well, there were actually 60 cases in the U.S. at that point, and it only went up, as we've seen. February 27th, he said, like a miracle, it's going to disappear. And he seemed to be relying upon a miracle because he was not taking action. He was not stocking up supplies. He was not issuing public health guidance. On February 28th, he held another rally, and he complained about the way that the media and Democrats talked about coronavirus and called it, quote, "their new hoax." He's since tried to sue to stop an ad from running that includes that quote of him on video saying that it was, quote, "their new hoax." He's denied saying it. It's on video. The very next day after he talked about their new hoax, was the first U.S. death. That day, Washington declared a state of emergency. March 3rd, he said things are going very well, and he said that he didn't think it would spread across the country. Only on March 3rd did the U.S. approve a plan for widespread testing. A reminder that South Korea put its plan in place within 2 weeks of the first case. And it wasn't until March that we put a plan in place. And as we can see, it's really only at the end of April that testing has stepped up in any widespread way. On March 4th, he did an interview with Fox News where he suggested it was fine for people to just go to work with the virus. He said, quote, "some of them go to work, but they get better." And later in that day, he said it is, quote, "very much in hand." March 5th, California and Maryland declared states of emergency. March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. President Trump said that day, "I think we're doing a really good job in this country at keeping it down. A tremendous job at keeping it down. Anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test." That was not a true statement then. It would not be a true statement if made today. He said, "They're here, the tests, and the tests are beautiful. The tests are all perfect, like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? This was not as perfect, but pretty good." He can't stay on topic, always going back to impeachment and Ukraine and Russia and the whistleblower. He couldn't stay focused. March 7th, and that was while he was at the CDC, wearing, by the way, a Keep America Great campaign hat. March 7th, New York declared a state of emergency, and Trump went golfing. March 8th, the president golfed again. March 9th, he again compared it to the flu in a tweet and suggested that it would go away on its own. March 10th, he said, quote, "it's really working out. It will go away." We were up to almost 1,000 cases then. Today, with over 1 million cases, 1,000 cases seems almost quaint. On March 11th, the World Health Organization, which had already labeled this a global health emergency, increased their language and called it a pandemic, a global pandemic. Only on March 13th did President Trump declare a national emergency. In a Rose Garden ceremony, he announced that Google was building a website that would help people figure out if they had the coronavirus. This reportedly came as news to the people at Google. This site still does not exist. He also claimed that day that Walmart was going to be donating its parking lots, and that they would be used as drive-through test sites. This has not happened. Only on March 16th did he finally lay out guidelines for social distancing. One of the leading health data analytic institutes in the country has determined that if he had put that guidance out just 2 weeks earlier, 90% of the deaths that are expected to occur could have been prevented. He certainly knew 2 weeks earlier about the threat. States within this country had declared states of emergency. Other countries had declared states of emergency. The World Health Organization had declared a state of emergency. But President Trump did not. And as President Obama's former HHS secretary said, quote, "We basically wasted 2 months." And President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, said that that delay of over 2 months cost, quote, "many tens of thousands of lives." On March 16th, he told governors that they were on their own. In a call, which the New York Times has released audio of, he said, respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves. On March 17th, he finally acknowledged for the first time that this was a pandemic, and then claimed that he quote, "I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic." A reminder, just days earlier, he was still comparing it to the flu. March 26th marked the day that President Trump's promise of making America first came true in the way that we most didn't want it to. America overtook the rest of the world in the total number of cases. And it was not until after that that President Trump first invoked the Defense Production Act, not until near the end of March. For a month, governors had been begging him for equipment, for supplies. Governor Cuomo had said, you know, you have this thing called the Defense Production Act. You could be urging manufacturers to create ventilators. Any apparel company could be creating masks and gowns. But he didn't do that. He waited. Now it is starting to happen, but it's too late for too many people. We have documented how nurses in some hospitals here in New York were reduced to wearing garbage bags because they didn't have protective gear. We're sharing a video today about a college student who had to fabricate a hazmat suit for her nurse mom because she was afraid her mom didn't have the adequate protective gear at work. Some 9,000 healthcare workers have become sick in this country. Several of them have died just here in New York. I don't even have the current number. By March 29th, the president, who had been saying for months that this was just going to go away on its own, he finally acknowledged that the death toll could be as high as 200,000. And moments after saying that, he went on to brag about the ratings for his daily press briefings, saying that comparing them to Monday Night Football or The Bachelor finale. Days later, he raised the bar and said that it might be as many as 240,000 Americans who would die. And moments after saying that, he made a joke comparing medical models as to how many Americans would die to the hot models he used to date. And so that has been the very baffling, puzzling history of the true timeline of President Trump's response. So today, you heard him blaming China. You heard him blaming the Obama administration. We heard a little bit of him blaming states today. At various times, he's blamed the World Health Organization. The one repeated statement that seems to prove true from his briefings is that the time that he said, "I don't take responsibility at all," that appears to be a true statement. Despite the many opportunities that he had to take action sooner, he does not take responsibility for the decisions that he has made. He will accept and demand credit for the things that have gone right. He repeatedly says that just yesterday he was challenged by a reporter who said, what is the case for, I'm paraphrasing her question, but she said, what is the case for re-electing a president if more Americans die on his watch than died in over a decade of the Vietnam War? And he said, very literally, he said that it could have been worse if he'd done nothing. That his response was better than nothing, because if he'd done nothing, the models suggest that some 2 million Americans could die. That is the case the president makes now for his re-election, is that what he has done is literally better than nothing. Here in across the country, we are likely to cross today the threshold of more Americans killed by the coronavirus than were killed by the Vietnam War. In New York City alone, we have lost more than 17,000 of our citizens. In New York State, the state that President Trump was glibly suggesting should go bankrupt, we have lost nearly 23,000 of our citizens. And we are not on the other side of this. As cases continue to rise, President Trump continues to urge states to reopen, even before the testing is in place that would allow them to safely do so. Tony Fauci said just this weekend, Tony Fauci, who notably has been absent from the last two briefings, there are speculations that the President Trump is keeping him out of the spotlight for a while. As recently as this weekend, he said that we need to be doing about double the testing that we're doing to begin reopening safely. But nevertheless, President Trump is urging states to begin to reopen. My advice to anyone out there watching, just as a New Yorker, as just one person here in this city that has been through so much, is to pay more attention to the public health officials than to the president. Do not go into public spaces that you don't need to go into. Wear a mask if you need to go out. Please take social distancing very, very deadly seriously. I want to thank you for joining us. I am now this senior politics producer, Alan Piper. I had the support today from many in our newsroom, everyone working remotely from home, most particularly from Emily Barger, Brandon Caruso, Christina Coca, Maddie Green, Ian McKenna, Sarah Heder, Kavish Harjai, and Shelby Vacuum. To everyone out there, please stay safe. Please take care of yourself. Please check in on the people that you care about and make sure they know how much they mean to you. We're going to get through this thing together. If the president is back tomorrow, our team will be back tomorrow as well to fact check him. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.